Welcome to Speculative Sandbox. This is Vicky Lawn, and I'm going on a short hiatus to work on book revisions, but I've asked my fellow author friends to take care of the podcast while I'm away. Don't forget to subscribe or follow Speculative Sandbox on Instagram and X, formerly Twitter, to get episode notifications and upcoming news. I look forward to chatting again soon.
Welcome to Speculative Sandbox. I'm Katee Stein with today's Author Takeover. I'm excited for this opportunity to meet and engage with all of you and talk about something near and dear to my heart, and that is community. It's a slight departure from some of our genre discussion, but finding and utilizing it has been fundamental to my own writing journey, and I hope will be encouraging to yours as well. But before we get into that, let me first tell you a little bit about me. I'm a science fiction and fantasy author hailing from Canada. Like many of us, I'm a lifelong reader, writer, and appreciator of story. By trade, I work in special education to support students with exceptionalities and diverse learning needs. But in 2019, I transitioned, fortuitously before the Great Plague, to working from home and focusing on writing. My debut novel, Glass Helix, released in September 2023 through Stag Beetle Books. It's a YA dystopian romance featuring a near-future genetic catastrophe that leaves humanity frail and isolated. Think of Orwell's 1984's chilling utopian-looking dystopia, meeting the pacing and personal stakes of something more like Veronica Roth's Divergent. I would like to think that it's both clever and compelling, pulling at the heartstrings while still leaning into all the world building that made me fall in love with science fiction in the first place. On a personal note, I like coffee, good coffee, and cats, and I've recently started running, which I was pretty sure was against my personal belief system. And although I look like Phoebe running through the park, yes, that's a Friends reference, I am of a certain age, it's bringing me joy. All right, now that we've covered the essentials, let's jump in. Community. What is it? Why do we need it? Does it really benefit our writing? I'll say up front, this is not an extrovert's guide to how to be social or some other nonsense. Not only would this be wildly out of my depth as an introvert, it would be completely inappropriate. Community takes many forms and at its best invites us to engage in ways that make sense to us as individuals. Before I found my people, I envisioned writing community as a think tank, meeting and debating the minutiae of each of our stories. A place where my writing would be examined and disseminated and where I would, for my own benefit and growth, learn to take criticism on the chin like a champ. After all, I'd been told to be a writer, I needed to develop a thick skin. Why not start at the ground level and desensitize myself right off the get-go? Over the course of my writing life, I've been a part of writing communities that were exactly this. Impersonal, disconnected forums where people gathered and indulged in self-edifying criticism of each other. Was all the feedback bogus? Absolutely not. In some cases, it was bang on. Other feedback, well, maybe not so much. It's not that there's no value in these spaces, but in terms of believing it was my community, therein lie the trouble. I would propose that a writing community is more about finding your people to journey with than someone to critique your work. There's absolutely space for this, but I'll circle around to that in a bit. It's much easier to find people who are willing to give you editorial, impartial feedback in the writing world. We have editors of all sorts, beta readers, online critique forums, classes and workshops. If you want craft advice, it is out there. Absolutely use it, greedily if you must. But for the sake of today's discussion, this is not what I'm talking about. It's much more personal, and I think that's where this conversation around writing community can get weird. If we carry any sort of baggage in terms of interpersonal relationships, it can be downright terrifying. Am I actually suggesting true writing community is not just a craft workshop, but cultivating real relationships with fellow authors? I am, and I agree it's a daunting prospect. I'm not perfect, you're not perfect. We're going to come with different perspectives, different baggage, different expectations. Why do this to ourselves? Why invite these dynamics into our writing life? Especially when we could continue in the comfort of our own quiet spaces, safe from it all. I would argue because it's worth it. And because writing is a demanding profession, blending business savvy and creative vulnerability. Although our support networks outside of the writing world are critical, having those who intimately understand what you are facing is a treasure. Finding peers who understand the heart of your work, who journey with you, can make such a difference. I believe it can expand our capacity to step out. We feel braver. It can build our resiliency when we get knocked down. We feel stronger. It can stretch our perspective and help us see our work, ourselves, and others in a clearer light. I want and need this. How about you? Intuitively, we know being in community is a risk. And yet, in our own ways, to our own personal needs and comfort levels, most of us find ourselves in community. Sometimes very small, sometimes expansive, some deep, some surface. Each of these spaces plays a role in our life. In our writing life, we can cultivate a similar network. While talking with a social worker at school one day, I was struck by an interesting phenomenon. We were discussing the differences between several students in a classroom. In this environment, social differences can really be highlighted. Some students carry an almost innate confidence. They walk in and beyond a sole function of personality, they're comfortable in their own skin. They carry a self-assuredness that would make many adults envious. I'm not talking about the loud bluster of false security, but a young and honest belief that they belong and therefore can unapologetically take up space. I marveled at it. It was definitely not how I remember feeling through my school years. So I asked the social worker what he felt was a defining factor from one child to the next. His answer stuck with me. They feel secure. I remember thinking, well, obviously, look at them. He explained further that often these children came from homes where their position and identity, their sense of belonging, was secure. It allowed them to take risks in a social setting because they had a strong foundation from which to leap. Instead of a life is hard, let's toughen them up mentality, they'd been given a safe place from where courage was born to leap on their own. Now clearly, this is my paraphrase of a singular conversation and is no way meant to be a commentary of child development. But rather, I remember being impacted by how powerful that thought was. If we feel safe, it's easier to be brave. Find the people who not only help you grow, but who help you feel brave. If we can offer safe places for our writing to be imperfect and messy, we can also discover and grow without fear. On the flip side, we can critique craft without the attitude that being harsh is helpful. It's not. This journey is hard enough. Let's create spaces we wish our work had. Honest feedback can be gentle. As we build safety and trust with our writing partners and critique groups, we cultivate courage and we can step out with bravery. I don't think you have to be living the writing life for more than 5 minutes to discover that seeing any project through is going to take some serious grit. The odds are stacked against us at every turn. From industry professionals that can treat authors as an inconvenience rather than peers, to a publishing system that undervalues and undercuts writers' ability to make a living from their work. This space is not for the faint of heart. Yet I am inspired time and again by my peers who persist and encourage me to do the same. We wade the query trenches, we face rejections, we wait on sub, and wait and wait. This road can be discouraging, but it's also not without hope. Not if we continue to write, to believe our words mean something, to trust our stories are meant to be read. There are readers who are waiting for our unique perspectives on the world. So how do we keep going when we're buried beneath logistics and numbers? How do we justify the hours of work and years of labor in the in-betweens and long waits? I wrote my first book without a writing community, but I can tell you it got so much easier when I found those who could help carry the load. They became empathizers and cheerleaders, who sat with me when I was down and cheered me on when I got up. We need to guard our creative well, and community can help do just that. They can remind us that our words matter, encourage us when we need to withdraw and resupply, lift us up when we need to step out, and celebrate our wins together. One of my favorite encouragements used between myself and my two closest critique partners is something we dubbed the BS shelf. It's an imaginary shelf where manuscripts go to rest after passing through a long query road, when it's time to lay them down and move forward with something else. If you've been here, you know it's a painful proposition. But in a twist, the shelf is named in honor of Mr. Brandy Sandy himself, Brandon Sanderson. The story goes that he was at it for 8 years and wrote 13 novels before his first one was picked up. He was a night clerk at a hotel, doing what so many of us do, stealing moments and dreaming stories. Yet he persisted. He kept writing and revising, even though those books sat on a shelf unpublished. When his time came, those shelved stories suddenly became a built-in backlist for all of his effort. I love this story. It gives me hope that even when we think our efforts are wasted or in vain, it's just not time. We sometimes need to be reminded of stories like this. Other times we need to be indulged with some dark humor or cajole one another forward when tears and anger have run out. These moments can breathe strength back into tired hearts so that we can get up and try again. Don't journey alone. Find those who have your back and give you strength. Here is where we circle back to the familiar structures. Even the most self-aware among us can have blind spots when looking at our own work, and a strong writing community can help bolster us and fill in the gaps. Good feedback functions as both a sounding board and a mirror, allowing us to see with fresh eyes and gain new perspectives. Choosing those who understand the value of preserving your writing voice and honoring your intentions as an author is vital. The outside perspective is not meant to overwrite your own, but rather enhance it. In the early days of drafting and sharing my work, I remember being utterly demoralized by feedback that would completely dismantle what I had written, only to turn it into something else entirely. There is a fine line here, and I find that people often argue in favor of authors toughening up and learning to take criticism. While I'm all for remaining teachable, there's a big difference between an attitude willing to listen and a blank check style deference that believes all feedback is more valuable than your own instincts. A good example of this is often seen in the trends and rules that get spouted at writers from the nearest social media platform. These are often distilled into do's and don'ts for quote-unquote good writing, and yet without fail, the next book we pick up from the shelf breaks whatever rule we were just beaten over the head with. These instances are often explained as exceptions or because the author did it well, as if they were the only one able to manage the convention with any nuance. When being bombarded by voices, it can be hard to tell what is valuable and valid and what is foundational to improving your writing craft. Obviously, rules and conventions are there for a reason, so we need a place to work out when to use them, when to break them, and if something is actually working. Here is where fellow writers who value craft and seeing your story become the best it can be, become invaluable. My first taste of true writing community was a group that was anything but formal. 5 of us found one another during a Twitter pitch party. Someone thought to make a group chat so that we could support one another during other events. Then from there, we started to share pitches before events and look over each other's queries afterwards. Eventually, in the chat, we started to talk through some of the writing conventions we were coming up against. Do we really never use adverbs? We started to share bigger pieces of work. It was a slow, organic process of getting to know one another and our distinct writing styles, genres, and goals. In this place, though, we could ask questions that were scary to voice elsewhere. We could write, learn, and grow together. It didn't happen all at once, but I'm so glad I stepped into the uncomfortable place of getting to know strangers, because they became my friends and trusted peers. It's an amazing thing that when I'm stuck, I can talk through whatever story hang-up I'm dealing with and have people who I trust offer me insight. They have proven over and over again that they are committed to helping bring my story into the world and make it the best it can be. Because there is trust, we can delve deeper, face the flaws in our work, and come out the other side better for it. As with any community, there can be pitfalls to journeying closely with others. Sometimes we can be disappointed or hurt. Sharing any part of life with others can be messy, but I hope I've highlighted a few ways it has the potential to be rich and worth the risk. I wanted to show how an honest and constructive writing community supports not only ourselves, but those around us. I hope you have or find community that makes you brave and strong and gives you clarity, and you in turn can offer a similar space for others to find the same. It's been a privilege sharing with you today. Extra thanks to Vicki Lawn and the Speculative Sandbox for opening up this space for authors. The Sandbox is exactly the sort of supportive community I've been talking about, encouraging discussion and collaboration. Let's keep learning together and moving forward, word by word. Happy writing, crew.
Speculative Sandbox is a volunteer-run podcast that relies on the collaboration of fellow creators like you. Join the conversation and participate in fun polls and questionnaires on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Interested in being in a future episode? Our DMs are open, or you can email speculativesandbox@gmail.com.